My name is David Morales. I'm 55 years old, and I've been working in IT longer than some of my coworkers have been alive. For 3 decades, I've kept networks running, patched servers at 2 in the morning, and pulled companies back from the brink of collapse more times than I can count. But nothing, and I mean nothing, felt as surreal as the day I watched my office grind to a halt. 9 hours. That's how long the system stayed down. 9 hours of frozen screens, dead terminals, and panicked voices. Managers pacing the hallways, phones ringing nonstop, customers screaming on the other end. Every department, from finance to sales, completely paralyzed. And in the middle of all that chaos, me, sitting calmly at my desk, listening to the same voices that had mocked me weeks earlier, now begging for help. It's funny how quickly things change. Not long before that crash, the younger staff in my department loved to joke about me. They called me old school, boomer, the dinosaur. They'd laugh when I insisted on doing manual backups, or when I told them to double-check the error logs instead of just relying on flashy dashboards. To them, I was relic from a different time, useful in theory, but irrelevant in practice. I never snapped back. I never argued. I'd smile faintly, maybe mutter something under my breath, and keep working. Because deep down, I knew something they didn't. Experience isn't flashy. It isn't loud. It doesn't always look impressive in meetings. But when things break, and in IT, things always break, experience is the only thing that matters. The kids didn't see that. Management didn't either. To them, I was background noise, someone who knew the old systems, but wasn't part of the shiny future, until the day the system went dark. It started mid-morning. First a few glitches, then a complete freeze. Within minutes, the entire company was offline. Panic spread faster than the outage itself. The hotshots scrambled, clicking through screens, Googling fixes, muttering acronyms they barely understood. Nothing worked. The phones kept ringing. The pressure mounted. And that's when every eye in the room turned to me. The dinosaur. The outdated relic. The guy they said didn't belong anymore. I leaned back in my chair, folded my arms, and let the silence stretch. Because in that moment, I wasn't just another voice in the room. I was the only one who knew how to bring the system back to life. They had mocked me for weeks, but now their entire world depended on the very knowledge they had dismissed, and I wasn't in a rush to remind them. They thought I was irrelevant until the system collapsed, and suddenly the dinosaur was the only one who could save them. When I first started working in IT, computers filled entire rooms and hummed like restless engines. I remember the smell of warm circuit boards, the feel of punch cards in my hand. Back then, if something went wrong, you didn't Google a solution. You figured it out with your hands, your brain, and maybe a dog-eared manual. That's how I built my career. 30 years of late nights, blinking monitors, and caffeine-fueled problem solving. I worked my way up from a junior technician to senior systems administrator, the guy bosses called when everything else failed. It wasn't glamorous work. My name wasn't on the big client presentations. I wasn't closing sales or shaking hands in boardrooms, but I kept the backbone alive. The networks, the servers, the databases that made all the shiny stuff possible. When I did my job right, nobody noticed. When I didn't, the whole company noticed. And I liked it that way. Quiet, steady, reliable. For years, my colleagues respected that. I was the guy you wanted around in a storm. The one who could trace a problem through lines of code or untangle a miswired switch at 3 in the morning. When younger techs joined the team, I trained them. I showed them not just what to do, but why it mattered. I took pride in it. I wasn't just fixing machines, I was passing on a craft. But time doesn't slow down for anyone. The tech world changes faster than most people can keep up. Cloud systems, automation, flashy dashboards, all useful tools, sure, but I saw how easily they lulled people into thinking the fundamentals didn't matter anymore. And management loved the optics of hiring fresh talent, kids straight out of college, buzzing with confidence, talking about trends and new frameworks like they were reading off Twitter headlines. They looked good in meetings. They spoke the right buzzwords. And little by little, the company shifted its focus. Suddenly, my experience wasn't something to admire. It was something to laugh at. At first, the jokes were small. A smirk when I mentioned running a manual backup. A chuckle when I brought up a system from the 2000s. "David, you're a walking museum," one of them said once, grinning as the others laughed. I smiled back, but inside, it stung. I told myself it didn't matter. Let them laugh. I knew what I knew. But slowly, the tone changed. The new hires started brushing me off in meetings. "That's old school thinking," they'd say. Or, "We don't need that anymore. We've got automation." I'd warn them about blind spots, things I'd seen crash systems before, but they waved me away like I was nagging. One kid, barely 22, called me the dinosaur, right to my face. The room laughed. Even my manager cracked a smile, saying, "Easy now. Dinosaurs have their uses." I laughed along, but something in me cracked, because it wasn't a joke anymore. It was a dismissal. Still, I kept my head down. I wasn't there to win popularity contests. I was there to do my job. I reminded myself of the quiet pride I felt all those years, the feeling of being the last line of defense when things went wrong. But then I started noticing something troubling. The kids were cutting corners. They'd skip backups to save time. They'd install updates without testing them. They relied on flashy dashboards that showed green check marks but ignored the warning logs buried deeper in the system. I knew where this road led. I'd seen it before. Overconfidence paired with inexperience is the fastest way to disaster in IT. One Friday afternoon, I walked past a junior tech's desk and noticed the backup schedule had been skipped entirely. I asked why. He shrugged. "It takes forever. We'll be fine." His friends laughed and went back to their screens. I didn't argue, not out loud. But inside, a knot tightened. Because I knew, one day, the system would go down. And when it did, all the jokes, all the smirks, all the dismissals would vanish. They'd realize the dinosaur wasn't extinct after all. For a long time, I thought experience was enough. That the years of loyalty, the steady hands, the quiet wins would always matter. I thought being the man who kept the lights on still meant something. But the truth is, the world loves novelty. It loves the shiny, the young, the new. And I had become invisible until the moment everything broke. That was the life I thought I had, respected, steady, trusted. And slowly, it was unraveling right in front of me. I thought experience still mattered. But to them, I was nothing more than a relic, until the day the system failed, and suddenly, the relic was the only one left standing. The unraveling didn't happen all at once. It started with little moments, things that, at first, seemed small enough to ignore. I'd walk past a workstation and catch a glimpse of a warning flashing on a screen. Disk space running low. Memory spikes. Backup skipped. Things that once would have sent alarms ringing through the office now earned nothing but a shrug from the kids. "Don't worry, automation's got it," they'd say. Or, "The dashboard's still green. It's fine." But I knew better. I'd been in this business long enough to understand that dashboards lie. They show you the surface, not the cracks underneath. It's like looking at a shiny car and ignoring the engine smoke. The tension built slowly, like a leak in a pipe you can hear but no one else notices. Every day, I felt my patience stretch thinner. One afternoon, I overheard them mocking me again. I was sitting at my desk, headphones in but not playing anything, when one of the younger guys leaned over to another and whispered, "Careful, don't. Let the dinosaur near the server. He'll try to reboot it with a hammer." They both laughed. Another joined in. "Yeah, he probably still thinks floppy disks are cutting edge." I sat there quietly, typing, not giving them the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside, the words burned. Not because I cared what they thought of me personally, but because I knew how unprepared they were for what was coming. See, arrogance is loud, but failure is silent until it hits like a hammer. And the hammer was coming. I started noticing gaps everywhere, logs piling up unreviewed, security patches skipped, routine maintenance tasks ignored. The younger team spent more time debating the latest frameworks and arguing about whose code looked cleaner than actually safeguarding the system we relied on. They didn't understand that IT isn't about looking clever in a meeting. It's about keeping the lights on when everything else goes dark. I could have spoken up louder. I could have marched into my manager's office and waved red flags. But I didn't. Because by then, I understood the truth. No one was listening. They had already decided I was background noise. So I stopped arguing. I stopped reminding them. And I started watching. I kept a quiet log of everything I saw. Skipped backups, ignored errors, downtime risks. I wrote it all down, date by date, like a private journal of their incompetence. Not because I wanted to tattle, but because I knew. When the system broke, people would look for someone to blame. And I wasn't about to let decades of my work get buried under their arrogance. The silence became my shield. But the tension at work kept growing. Meetings turned into comedy shows at my expense. One kid presented a streamlined process that completely eliminated the manual backup protocol I had created years ago. Management applauded. "This is the future," they said. I bit my tongue. I wanted to shout, "The future still needs a safety net." But I didn't. I just sat there, nodding faintly, feeling the gap widen between what they thought they knew and what they were actually capable of. And then came the Friday that confirmed everything. It was late in the afternoon, the kind of hour when people are half watching the clock, waiting for the weekend. I walked past a junior tech station and noticed the backup schedule screen open. The log clearly showed the week's backups hadn't run. Not once. "Why didn't you run it?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. The kid smirked. "Takes too long. We've got cloud redundancy anyway. We'll be fine." The others laughed, nodding in agreement, like skipping one of the most critical safety steps was a badge of honor. I didn't argue. I didn't even shake my head. I just walked back to my desk, sat down, and wrote one line in my log. Backup skipped. Friday, 4:37 p.m., because in that moment, I knew. The unraveling wasn't a maybe anymore. It was a certainty. I had seen it before. Companies that cut corners, teams that got cocky, managers that favored shiny over steady. It always ended the same way. A system crash big enough to shake the walls. And this time, it wasn't a matter of if, it was when. That night, I sat at home, staring at my own notebook where I had scribbled warnings. My wife asked why I was so quiet. I told her, "Something's coming. They don't see it yet, but I do." She frowned. worried. So what are you going to do? I leaned back, eyes on the ceiling, and said, nothing. Not until it happens, because I understood something those kids didn't. Sometimes the best way to teach a lesson is to let the fire burn. The tension at work had turned into a ticking clock. I could almost hear it in the hum of the servers, the ignored warnings, the skipped protocols. And I knew, when that clock struck zero, when the system finally collapsed, it wouldn't be me scrambling. It would be them. I stayed silent. I let them laugh. But I kept watching, because one missed backup was all it would take to bring the whole system crashing down. The moment I knew came on an ordinary Wednesday morning. Ordinary, at least, for everyone else. For me, it was the day the last bit of doubt drained out of me. We were in a staff meeting, gathered around the big conference table. Management wanted updates on the system status, and the younger staff were eager to show off. Charts, colorful dashboards, graphs that looked impressive but said very little. One of the kids, 24 maybe, gave his report with a smirk. "Everything's running smooth," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We don't need to waste time with outdated manual checks anymore. Automation handles it." Then, as if to punctuate his point, he turned toward me. "Unless the dinosaur has something to add?" The room erupted in laughter. Managers chuckled. A few colleagues shook their heads in amusement. I sat there, expressionless, staring at the kid who had just dismissed 3 decades of my career in front of everyone. In the past, I might have tried to defend myself. Might have explained why manual checks mattered, why backups weren't optional. But that morning, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel shame. I felt clarity. Because right before that meeting, I had seen something none of them noticed, a warning buried in the logs, not on the flashy dashboard, not on the slides they loved to parade around. It was small, an error code I recognized instantly, the kind that doesn't crash a system today but will, eventually, if ignored. I'd seen that exact code 20 years earlier at another company. Back then, no one listened either. A week later, the servers went down for 3 days. So when that kid mocked me, calling me a dinosaur, I didn't argue. I didn't try to win them over. I sat there, quiet, letting the laughter fade, because I knew what was coming. I remember folding my hands on the table and thinking, go ahead, laugh now. When the fire starts, you'll remember the dinosaur. That was my snap. Not an outburst, not a breakdown, a decision. I stopped wasting energy trying to prove myself. I stopped fighting to be heard in rooms where no one cared. If they wanted to mock me, let them. If they wanted to cut corners, let them. If they wanted to skip the protocols I had built with sweat and sleepless nights, let them. Because the system was already ticking like a bomb, and when it blew, there would be only one person in the room who knew how to stop the bleeding. That meeting ended like every other. Kids boasting about efficiency, managers nodding along, me left in silence. But as we filed out, one thought repeated in my mind. Don't argue. Don't warn. Just wait. I went back to my desk, opened my private log, and added a new entry. Error code detected. Ignored in meeting. Failure imminent. Then I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair, strangely calm. Because for the first time in months, I wasn't frustrated anymore. I wasn't carrying the weight of trying to make them listen. I was ready. They thought I was outdated. They thought I was irrelevant. They thought I was just taking up space until retirement. But soon, they'd learn what I already knew. The dinosaur wasn't extinct. The dinosaur was waiting. I didn't yell. I didn't fight. I just sat there in silence, knowing the crash was coming. And when it did, they'd finally see who really kept this place alive. After that meeting, something inside me shifted permanently. I no longer felt the urge to defend myself. I didn't need to. The system itself would do the talking for me soon enough. Instead of wasting breath, I started preparing. Every morning, before the office filled with chatter and the smell of burnt coffee, I'd sit at my desk and go through the logs. Not the dashboards, not the pretty graphs the kids loved, but the raw, ugly lines of code and error messages. That's where the truth lived. And sure enough, the warnings piled up. Memory leaks, failed backups, processes hanging longer than they should. Nothing catastrophic yet, but like hairline cracks in a dam, I knew one day the whole thing would burst. I documented everything, quietly, patiently. Each skipped backup got a timestamp in my notebook. Each ignored error was screenshotted and saved to a hidden folder on my desktop. I wasn't hoarding proof for management. No one cared until things broke. I was hoarding it for myself, to stay ready for the moment when I'd be called, because deep down, I knew it wasn't a matter of if, it was only when. Meanwhile, the younger staff carried on like they were untouchable. They laughed louder, mocked harder. They took pride in how fast they could deploy updates, how flashy their solutions looked in meetings. One even bragged about deleting an old backup system I'd built years ago. Don't worry, we don't need the dinosaur safety nets anymore. The others clapped like it was a victory. I sat there sipping my coffee, writing another line in my log. Removed legacy backup system. Risk increased. My strategy wasn't just about recording mistakes. It was about building my own safety net in the shadows. I kept copies of key recovery scripts on a secure flash drive hidden in my desk. I mapped out a step-by-step recovery plan in my notebook, handwritten so no one could delete it with a keystroke. I even updated my own offline documentation, a manual only I understood, so when the system did crash, I wouldn't waste time scrambling. To anyone watching, I looked like a tired old man scribbling nonsense in a notebook. To me, I was sharpening a blade. At home, my wife noticed the change. "You're calmer," she said one night. "They don't get under your skin like before." I smiled faintly. Why argue with people who don't know the storm is coming? She tilted her head, half concerned, half curious. "So what are you going to do when it hits?" I looked her in the eye. "I'll do what I've always done. I'll keep the lights on. But this time, they'll see exactly what that means." Weeks went by, more skipped protocols, more arrogance. My manager, oblivious, praised the efficiency of the younger staff. "They're the future," he told me once, smiling like he was delivering wisdom. I just nodded, because I knew the future he was praising was already built on cracks. And then, little by little, the system started limping. Processes slowed, ticket requests doubled, customer complaints trickled in. The kids brushed it off as normal traffic. I saw it for what it was, the ground shifting under their feet. Still, I stayed silent. My strategy was patience. I let them run their dashboards. I let them give their colorful reports. I let them laugh at me behind my back, because silence has weight. Silence builds pressure. And when the crash came, and I knew it would hit harder because of how loud their confidence had been. By then, my recovery plan was airtight. I had 3 separate contingencies, depending on where the failure struck. I had scripts ready to deploy, backups quietly synced to an external drive no one even knew existed, and a mental map of the system that none of them could dream of holding in their heads. I wasn't planning revenge with fire or fury. I was planning revenge with precision. Because the best way to silence arrogance isn't to argue. It's to let the world collapse under its own weight and then quietly rebuild it with your bare hands. The Friday before everything broke, I sat in my office watching the younger staff huddle around their screens, laughing about weekend plans. One of them walked past me and said, "Don't work too hard, old man. We've got it covered." I smiled politely, wrote one last note in my log, and closed the notebook. Because I already knew the system was on borrowed time, and when the collapse finally came, they'd realize the dinosaur wasn't just waiting. The dinosaur was ready. They thought silence meant defeat. What they didn't know was that silence was my preparation, and when the system failed, I'd be the only one holding the map. The crash came on a Tuesday morning. It started with small complaints, emails bouncing back, documents refusing to save. At first, people brushed it off as a glitch, but within an hour, the entire network was dead. Sales couldn't process orders. Finance couldn't access accounts. Customer service lines lit up with angry callers. By 10 o'clock, the company was paralyzed. The younger staff scrambled like ants in a storm, screens flashing, phones pressed to ears, fingers clacking on keyboards with growing desperation. Their dashboards, once so shiny and impressive, showed nothing but red. I sat at my desk, calm, watching the chaos unfold. One of the kids rushed over. "David, did you see this? Everything's down. We can't even log into the servers." I nodded slowly. "I see it." They darted off again, flailing between half-baked fixes that only made things worse. Management paced the hallways, barking orders, demanding updates. "How long until we're back online?" No one had an answer. By noon, the outage had stretched to 3 hours. Millions in potential revenue slipping through our fingers, customers threatening to pull contracts, executives sweating in their offices, and me? I leaned back, sipping my coffee, waiting, because I knew exactly what had happened. That warning I'd seen weeks earlier, the one they mocked me for mentioning, it had finally bloomed into disaster. The backups they skipped, the safety nets they dismantled, the arrogance they wore like a badge. It had all collided into the perfect storm, and not one of them knew how to fix it. By the 5th hour, panic had set in, phones ringing off the hook, managers whispering about calling outside consultants. The same kids who had called me a dinosaur now looked pale, sweating, their fingers trembling over keyboards. Finally, my manager stormed over to my desk. "David, do you know what's going on?" I looked up at him, steady. "Yes?" He blinked, desperate. "Can you fix it?" I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, the weight of the moment sinking into every corner of the room. Then I stood, grabbed my notebook, and said, "Step aside." The room hushed as I walked to the main terminal. For the first time all day, there was no laughter, no smirks, no dismissive jokes, just fear and hope. I plugged in my flash drive, opened the scripts I had prepared weeks earlier, and began working. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. I wasn't rushing. I wanted them to see. I wanted them to feel every second of their arrogance unraveling. First, I killed the runaway processes clogging the system. Then, I restored the last reliable backups, the ones I had quietly saved when they thought I was wasting time. Error logs scrolled across the screen, each one confirming what I already knew. Their skipped maintenance, their ignored warnings, their shortcuts had led us here. I didn't say a word. I just kept typing. Behind me, the room was silent except for the hum of servers rebooting. I could feel their eyes on me. The same kids who once joked about floppy disks now watching as the dinosaur brought their world back to life. By the 9th hour, the system flickered. Screens came back online. Emails flowed again. Customers reconnected. Slowly, cautiously, the heartbeat of the company returned. And then, finally, it was over. The office erupted in relief. Cheers, sighs, managers shaking hands, executives patting each other on the back. But the kids? They stayed quiet. Not one of them could look me in the eye. My manager turned to me, his face pale with exhaustion but soft with something else. Respect. David, he said quietly, you saved us. I nodded once, closed my notebook, and walked back to my desk. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The silence was enough, because they all knew. They had mocked me, laughed at me, dismissed me. They had called me a dinosaur. And yet, when the lights went out, when the system crashed, when the company's future dangled by a thread, it was the dinosaur who had the map back to the surface. That was my revenge. Not shouting, not payback, not rubbing it in. Just quiet, undeniable proof that experience never goes extinct. And the best part? I didn't have to say a word. When the system blinked back to life, the same kids who mocked me couldn't even meet my eyes. The dinosaur wasn't extinct. The dinosaur had saved them all. The days after the crash were strangely quiet. Not the silence of panic, but the silence of respect. People who used to laugh when I spoke in meetings now sat straighter, pens ready, when I opened my mouth. The jokes about floppy disks and hammers stopped overnight. Management sent out an official email praising the tireless efforts of our IT department in restoring the system. But everyone in that building knew the truth. It wasn't the department that saved the company. It was me, the dinosaur, the one they thought was irrelevant. My manager called me into his office that week. He looked uncomfortable, like a man rehearsing an apology. David, he said, I'll be honest. We underestimated you. I underestimated you. If you hadn't been here, I don't know what would have happened. I just nodded. I didn't need his apology. His fear during those 9 hours had been apology enough. Some of the younger staff avoided me altogether, their embarrassment too heavy to carry. Others tried awkward small talk, suddenly curious about the old ways of doing things. One even asked me to teach him how to read raw logs instead of dashboards. I agreed, but I didn't make it easy. Let them sweat for it. Respect has to be earned. The company invested in better systems after that, yes, but they also invested in listening. My warnings weren't brushed aside anymore. My notebook, once treated like a relic, became something of a Bible in the office. People even started calling it David's Manual. But beyond the office, something changed in me too. For years, I'd carried the sting of being dismissed, the quiet ache of being mocked for the very skills that had kept me alive in this industry. That day, when the system came back to life under my hands, the ache vanished, because I realized something simple. I didn't need their validation. I never had. The system itself was my validation. When it failed, they needed me. When it rose again, they respected me. Not because I demanded it, but because reality demanded it. That's the lesson I carry now. In a world obsessed with the shiny and the new, it's easy to dismiss experience. Easy to laugh at the man with gray hair, or the woman who's been around too long. But when the storm hits, it's not the flashy dashboards or the buzzwords that save you. It's the quiet hands that have done it before. They called me a dinosaur. But when the world went dark, the dinosaur lit it back up. And that, I've learned, is the sweetest kind of revenge. Not shouting, not gloating, not rubbing it in. Just standing tall while the truth speaks louder than you ever could. I don't know how long I'll keep working. Maybe a few more years, maybe longer. But now, when I walk into the office, I walk in with my head higher. Not because they finally respect me, but because I no longer need their laughter to sting. I know who I am. I'm not extinct. I never was. If you've ever been mocked, underestimated, or dismissed, remember this. Silence and patience aren't weakness. They're strategy. You don't need to argue with people who laugh at you. Let your results do the talking. If this story spoke to you, share it with someone who needs that reminder. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of revenge, justice, and redemption.